Is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining. We're just going to give it a minute or two before we kick off, so hang tight. Okay, just another minute or two to let a few more people jump on, and we'll begin shortly. Okay, everyone, thanks for joining. Hello, and welcome to the City Accelerator webinar series. My name is Owen Stone, and I'm a Senior Associate for Public Sector Innovation at Living Cities, where I've had the pleasure of working with the City Accelerator program. City Accelerator is a special initiative of Living Cities proudly supported by City Foundation, which helps to accelerate the adoption of innovations within and across local governments. This is the third cohort of the City Accelerator initiative, and it is focused on resilience, equity, and innovation in urban infrastructure finance. 4 cities, Pittsburgh, St. Paul, San Francisco, and Washington, D.C., came together for 18 months to figure out how to equitably fund critical infrastructure for their residents. By addressing aging infrastructure, building resilience, and mending inequality all at the same time, these cities are taking non-traditional approaches that can stand up to today's biggest challenges. These webinars are designed to give you first-hand accounts of the types of practices that can be scaled in your communities and all across the country. Today's webinar feature is Stairmasters, the Pittsburgh Priority. Our presenter is Kristen Saunders, a transportation planner from the city's new Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. We also have Jennifer Mayer joining us. Jen is the cohort lead for this project and has more than 25 years' experience advising federal, state, and local transportation and environmental agencies on infrastructure finance and policy. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we really get into it. On the right side of your screen is a chat box for questions. Please feel free to type your questions in as the presentation is moving along, and we'll get to as many of them as possible at the end. Also, if you're dialing in by phone, please make sure you are on mute. Finally, we are recording this whole presentation, and we will send it around to everyone who is attending the webinar today. With that, I'll be happy to turn it over to Kristen. Kristen, take it away.
Hi, can you hear me? This is Kristen Saunders. I am a transportation planner, as Owen mentioned, from the city of Pittsburgh. And we are working on starting a Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. So we're a couple months in, and this project sort of bridges my time from working at city planning to working as a planner in the transportation department. So this is one of our first projects as a new department. One sec. As Owen mentioned, our team is the City of Pittsburgh. Like I said, we're in the middle of bridging departments, so we're still working quite closely with city planning. And through the City Accelerator, with the money provided by the City Accelerator, we were able to hire a consultant team, which includes Tool Design Group, as well as Michael Baker International engineering firm, and also Cosmos Technologies, which did the cost estimating for this project. Just a little introduction, because I know some people are tuning in from all over the U.S. You're in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania right now. We have a little over 300,000 people, a density of, 5,500 people per square mile. We have 3 rivers, the Ohio, the Allegheny, and the Monongahela. We have 90 neighborhoods, which is quite a lot for our small size, and over a quarter of them reference the city's topography. I labeled a few of them here, and I just mentioned that because we are here to talk about staircases. Depending on how you count them, we definitely have over 100 or over 700 staircases. But if you break them up the way we break up our street grid, we have over 800 or even 900. So we have a lot of different counts, but we have a lot, let's say. And that represents over 24,000 vertical feet of stairs. So we're a very hilly city. Similar to, if you can see in the sort of topography, a lot of our flatlands are along rivers. These used to be the sort of industrial corridors, but they still represent, if you look at our road network, these still are the commercial corridors of the city. And a lot of our staircases provide access to them. So providing access to not only downtown, which is that triangle in the middle, but also kind of the other flatlands and commercial corridors. So the steps were our city's first transportation system. They used to bring people from the sort of hilly residential neighborhoods down to the steel mills, which were built on the only flat land in the city. They're a really critical part of our pedestrian network. Tons of people still use them. They, as you probably know if you're from a hilly city, but a lot of our streets do sort of switchbacks in order to get vehicles up the streets, and the stairs provide pretty critical connections. So you're not walking the miles it takes for a vehicle to climb the hill. So part of the challenge is just that these are, we have over 800 sets of steps. 450 of those are on structure. So those are steps. If you look at the picture to the far left, here is a good example of a picture of a set of steps that's on structure. So it's sort of flying in the air on piers or some sort of structure and then attached to the ground. The rest of our steps are on grade, which is that second photo from the left where they're actually built into the hillside. And that's relevant because the on structure steps are really like building and staging the rebuild of a mini bridge. We found, the only steps project, which I have some photos of a little bit later, that we have rebuilt in recent years is a set called John Care, and that project, was originally budgeted at about $400,000, and it ended up being about twice that when all was said and done, and that's really because of the staging process and because of the complexity of building on a steep slope and building a structure that really is like a mini bridge. So most of our steps were built in the 50s and 60s. They are deteriorating. They have not seen significant maintenance, and we want to figure out what to do with them. They've always, since I've started, I've always said that if someone gave me $700,000 today to rebuild a set of city steps, I wouldn't really know where to start because we've never gone through the sort of prioritization process that I'm going to talk about today. So our initial approach to the Living Cities application was more of an engineering focus, actually going out and getting a engineer's assessment of the condition of all of our steps. We really, I think it's always important to talk about things that you changed in a project, but we really changed the focus of a project to be more of a planning project. we found that the engineer's assessment wouldn't last quite as long as the prioritization process or some of the planning work that we went through. And it would be way more expensive, and the sort of half-life for an engineer's estimate is just a lot shorter. So our goal for this new planning project is to actually prioritize staircases based on geographic analysis, but also reaching out to the community and talking to them about, which sets of steps really were critical links in their transportation network. We also wanted to decide how we were going to rebuild steps in the future. So look at sort of best practices from other cities, understand if there are better or cheaper or more long-lasting ways to build steps than the ways we have in the past, and then look at investment strategies for some of those top steps. So of course a big component of this project was going out to talk to stakeholders. One of the other challenges of talking about steps is that they are so well dispersed throughout the city. And so you can't talk about steps as one entire group. They really have to be discussed on a neighborhood level. So we did, we tried to approach the public outreach from many avenues. We had a citywide kickoff meeting where we really talked about the prioritization methods. I feel like the people who show up for all the transportation meetings kind of showed up to this meeting, and they love talking about transportation. We also had an online wiki map where people could log in and actually give us comments on one particular steps and tell us how they use that step. And then the planning office, myself and colleagues went out to many neighborhood meetings, just sort of introduce the project, help people get on the wiki map, and gather feedback from those meetings. In the kickoff meeting, we really wanted to use that as a way to sort of check what we thought our priorities should be when we're going through this step analysis. So we asked people what makes a staircase important. We sort of assumed that, access to destination and its actual function as a transportation link is what made a staircase important. We found from talking to people that they also feel like this. One surprise from the public outreach and from talking to the community is just that we knew our steps were popular. Kind of a side note is that when I was doing some volunteer work on the steps, I sent out a request for volunteers, and we had 300 people sign up within a day to go outside and actually count our steps. So people here love the steps, and that message also came through in some of our public outreach. As you can see, cultural significance is ranked pretty high compared to the others when asked what makes a staircase important. When we asked people how should we improve our steps, we also got something, something we kind of expected is just that the structural condition. Some of our steps, it's hard to convey through photos, but they really are, hanging off the edge of a steep slope, and they don't look like they're in great shape. And so, we know that's an issue. But something else that was surprising from this, as well as neighborhood meetings and the wiki map responses, is that we think that small projects would really go a long way. Things like maintenance and litter cleanup, painting the railings, patching small pieces of concrete, dealing with if you can see in that maintenance litter cleanup photo, these are also usually situated in places where there's a lot of invasive species, so really addressing that. We also asked people kind of their materials preference. This had some surprises for us as well. People actually valued open decking, sort of the idea of, something that wouldn't hold snow or ice. So we'll definitely look into that more. And something that, I think a city agency would always love to hear, but when we ask people about how we should rebuild the steps sort of in general, the structure of the steps, they really just want whatever's most cost effective. So we'll take that and move forward. Like I mentioned, we did an online wiki map. This was online for over a month. And we really had a huge response rate. I think this is actually outdated. I apologize. But I think we had over 900 responses. Oh, no, the 997 surveys. We had over 900 responses on 360 set of steps. And that information has been really valuable to us. But like I mentioned earlier, the most commonly mentioned sort of obstacle to people actually using the steps on a daily basis is that overgrown vegetation. And then second is structurally unsound. So we, again, we learned that that vegetation issue is a really big deterrent for people when they're thinking about maybe using the steps versus another means to get to their destination. We also sort of asked people what the community's role, because we have this community that really cares about the steps. We wanted to know from neighborhood groups and people filling out the wiki map kind of what sort of energy there is or what the community's role should be in steps. And we had a lot of really interesting answers from everywhere, from just we should have a more coordinated reporting system for issues in the steps to we really want to build art projects and have a stewardship program and things like that. So our sort of takeaways, which some of them I've mentioned, but really look at things that steps that access to destinations, really find those, build on the community's interests. So really build that stewardship program, and also, of course, fix the steps, fix the structure. So here's a lovely image of one of our steps on structure, and you can imagine how that might feel if a railing was a little bit shaky, or if you could see rebar in the structure. They're really navigating a lot of terrain. So the way that we analyzed our steps with Tool Design Group, did a lot of this great work. We really looked at the walk shed. So one of our analysis points was access to destination. So we looked at the walk shed within the top and the bottom of each staircase and gave it a point system based on the type of destination that was there. Another factor was, if we take this staircase out of the network, how much longer would someone have to walk to get to the same destination? So that's the detour ranking. And then the other rankings, we looked at, so destinations I spoke about, detour I spoke about. We looked at the transit ridership within the set of steps. We looked at the population within that walk shed, that same walk shed, so population density. We did give steps that are in areas with a lot of low-income households a higher ranking, knowing that walking and access to transportation are really, more critical to those areas. And then we also had to look at the step density. We had an issue with sort of our analysis that a lot of the areas with lots and lots of steps were given a low ranking because the steps were taken into consideration when looking at the detour analysis. So we had to kind of give them a point just for having a lot of steps in the neighborhood. So our overall prioritization is that one that's highlighted in red. And this is the weighting that we gave to each of the categories. And then we also wanted to kind of catch steps that were special for other reasons that didn't make that overall list. So we looked at which steps are really important specifically to transit riders, so just ridership within the walkshed and population density within the walkshed. We looked at steps that were really important to access to school, so again, that population density, detour, and whether there's a school or not within the walkshed. And then we also wanted to at least examine the steps that just had a really high detour in their own category. So this is the result from the sort of overall categories, transit, school, and detour. And the ones that are colored are the ones that are repeated in the overall category, if that makes sense. So the ones that are not colored in each list are things that we actually need to look at specifically and add to that overall ranking. So this represents about 148 staircases, which still sounds like a lot. That's still a huge financial lift, but we're not talking about, over 700 or over 800 staircases anymore. We're really focused on this set. So here it is mapped. You can kind of see the priority staircases are in green. And this is something we need to take back out to the community. We know in some neighborhoods, this sort of analysis really, really worked, really gave us the steps that we've heard from the neighborhood itself, gave us the same steps were important, from the neighborhood group as in this analysis. And there are other neighborhoods, just based on the character and context of that particular staircase. One, for instance, up here, if you can see my mouse, up here, it kind of feels like it's in private property. And so that's something that's like really contextual, and you can't, figure that out from a, from GIS analysis. So that's something we had to just learn by going back out to the community and talking to them. We did prepare sort of a set of typical designs on a very base level to understand how generally we should be rebuilding our steps. We also did a best practices sort of set of research interviews to look at that as well. So we wanted to, look at best practices. We wanted 3 typical designs and different materials. And then one thing we learned from step tours with our DPW crews is just that we are doing pretty significant and life-extending rehabilitations of existing structures. And so those rehabs are not, they're not free, but they're not the, $700,000 or $800,000 rebuild project that we're looking at for a lot of our steps on structures. They're maybe more in that $200,000 range. And so we also wanted a typical design for a rehab. We also looked at, one of the tenets of this project was to figure out, how to actually make this investment feasible. So we developed a big program funding matrix and tag sources for different things. So when we talk about, this big list, there are different transportation funding resources that are specific to transit, that are specific to schools, and that are specific to things like density. And so we wanted to develop our funding matrix to relate back to the way that we're prioritizing our staircases. So I mentioned that very colorful priority step list is 148 steps. And this right now, we recognize this as a priority step list. This is based basically on GIS analysis and not, and we need to take that back out to the community. And this also is not based on the condition of the steps at all. This is just the ranking of how important this particular step is in the pedestrian network. So over the winter, our next step is to go out and assess these 148 steps in a way, with our own crews, in a way that would put them in the rebuild, rehab, and steward and maintain categories. So a complete rebuild, as far as financing goes, we'd really be looking at the transportation grants available to us because this is such an expensive option. But this is actually a photo of Jean Care, which is a set of steps in our Oakland neighborhood. As you can see, you're dealing with extremely steep slopes. You're often dealing with mature trees that maybe the community cares about, and you're dealing with drainage issues. It's not a small undertaking to rebuild a set of steps that are of the size of many of the sets that we're speaking about. So this category would focus on sort of the on-structure steps that would cost, over $400,000. The major rehab, this is an image from a set of steps on our south side, and this is a set where the community had received a grant to do an art project on the steps. I think that grant was in the tens of thousands of dollars range, but in order to bring that set of steps up to a condition that it could receive the art project on the steps, we actually had to invest $200,000 in a major rehab. And I think, a major rehab is something that we are very interested in doing, but we want to sort of use our priority list and, find those areas where we have a priority step, where it's eligible for a rehab, and where communities are interested in doing sort of stewardship or art projects, find those overlaps, rather than the other way around. And I'm sure people in other cities probably deal with the same sort of complicated issue all the time as well. And then maintain and steward. So steps that are in relatively good shape, that we could really focus on those small projects. And I showed a picture of these really adorable goats that sometimes, eat the vegetation in our hillsides. But invasive species is a big issue. It's not, we can't just send anyone out there to dig up all of the, say, knotweed on a steep hillside that's also holding a set of steps. We need to deal with drainage. We need to take a multi-yeared approach to really remediate invasive species. And then we need to plant something new there so that the hillside stays in place. So it's no small effort, but for those sets of steps that are our priority steps that are in pretty good shape, we want to pursue a stewardship program that would give people the expertise to do this, or give people the funding to hire people that would have the expertise to work on steep slopes, and then work with communities to do the maintenance projects. And that's actually all I have, which is a pretty short presentation. I welcome any questions you have, and let me know if you want me to go back to any slide. We definitely have a lot more detail on all of these pieces, but maybe I'll go back to the main slide.
Thanks, Kristen. We do have a few questions that came in, and I encourage everyone, if you do have questions, please feel free to continue to type them into the chat box on the right side of your screen. First question, just a clarifying question for me. I assume that it was the knotweed that was the invasive species and not the goats. Is that correct?
Yes. I think that was actually morning glory. I'm not a plant expert, but probably a little bit of both. I think we have some knotweed right in the front there, and we also have a lot of morning glory in the area. Yeah, it's anyone who's dealt with steep slopes and invasive species, it's not a, there's no quick and easy answer to that, so.
First question is, we're talking about priorities, and you've done a great job of kind of outlining where the city has prioritized some stairs. But how have you balanced the community priorities with the budget realities? Like, how do you explain decommissioning a set of steps that may be useful to some, but a lower priority for the citywide effort?
We have not tackled a decommissioning policy right now. Currently, our decommissioning policy is that if there's a life safety issue, our DPW, our crews go out and put a bar over the steps with a sign that says steps closed. There's no process behind it. There's no funding to fix those big life safety issues. So with this program, I'm assuming, we're pursuing a policy that would look at each of these categories. So this is only talking about the top 148 steps, but it would be a policy that would say we are going to maintain these 148 steps. We are going to reassess them we're going to do this, analysis again, every 5 to 10 years, but we are going to maintain our top steps. But it might also say that bottom 25%, we won't spend more than X amount of dollars maintaining them. And that is going to be a tough conversation to have with the community. However, having, done some discussions with the community, which kind of go like, well, if we take this bottom set of 25% of the steps that we aren't going to spend a lot of money rehabbing, that will allow us to, fix 56th Street, which you've all asked us to rebuild. I think, the community does understand those kind of trade-offs.
Yeah. Jen Mayer asked if rehabs are also included in the capital budget.
They will. They will be. This year our budget for steps 2 years ago was about, in 2017 actually, was I think $225,000, which is not very much when you're talking about the level of investment that I've discussed today. But this year it's over 400, I believe, and which that's double. So we're getting to a point where that money could actually pay for a significant rehab of a set of steps, which to start. So yes, it is intended that money would be most efficiently used through our capital budget, because the efficiency in rehabbing a set of steps is really that we can do it with our in-house, do it with our own crews and on-call contracts.
We have a question from Andrea on priority steps, and what is the schedule for tackling those? Are there priority schedules within the priority set?
Not yet. We're actually going out in the next 2 months. We're going to send some of our engineers out to actually assess the condition of all 148 in order to put them in that rebuild, rehab, and maintain and steward category. And then we would develop a schedule. We'd be developing, say, grant applications for the spring or capital budget requests for the spring from that technical assessment.
Have you seen this your work in prioritizing and community engagement and getting this project where it is today? Have you seen that work translate into other areas of the city, maybe like beyond stairwells?
Yeah, we're using, this is the first, I would say this is the first major project that we've worked on from this level of a prioritization process, using the data that's available to us. And we're definitely going to repeat that for, say, bike lanes and new transit facilities. I think we will be repeating a very, very similar prioritization process.
I have another question from Jen Mayer, who asked, just wondering with Cartograph. We'll show. Just wondering with Cartograph.
Cartograph? Oh. Yeah, we're.
Will it show how much is already being spent on maintaining the steps and how much O&M might be saved on improving some steps?
Yes. Well, Cartograph is the system we use for asset management citywide. So we have all of our. So I think we're going to do a couple different things with Cartograph. We're going to put our sort of priority steps. We're going to put a ranking into Cartograph. We haven't decided how much data we're going to pull from this prioritization process, but we're definitely going to pull the sort of ranking list. And that's going to do a couple things. It's going to prioritize maintenance. So, before we rid the entire city of Pittsburgh of all of its invasive species, we have to make decisions about which steps that we clear of vegetation first. And we have to make decisions about which set of steps we clear of snow and ice when there's a winter storm. And so the prioritization list, similar to the way that we have a similar thing for our roads during winter events, we'll kind of give our crews priority for doing that day-to-day maintenance. But we're also going to use Cartograph to actually do the inspection in the next couple months. So the crews will be putting the inspection information straight into Cartograph as well.
Do you think you would have gotten the same level of engagement that you did for the stairs if this had been about sewers and pipes? And how important is it to get visible structure to get people's attention?
With the discussion, our water agency is not under the city of Pittsburgh. That's actually through Pittsburgh Water and Sewer. But, with the amount of attention that's been on drinking water in the last couple of years, I would expect that this sort of project with dealing with sewers and pipes would get equal, if not more, attention. I think people see that as more of a life safety issue, and this is a life safety issue of one part of your life, that being transportation. But
again, keep the questions rolling in. Got another question here from Elizabeth. If you had to start this project over, would you do anything differently?
I mentioned that we did change the project midstream a bit. I would have started with a planning project in the application. It just would have set us up for this investment plan a little bit more. But other than that, we're really excited about the results. Getting to we're talking about 148 steps versus over hundreds and hundreds of steps, and that's a big improvement for us. It just gives us a direction to go in. So I would say we're pretty happy. I might have put less of an effort in the design guidelines, but actually I think we needed to do all of that work to understand how much the life cycle costs of each step. We needed to do all that work in preparation, so I wouldn't change anything.
Cool. I've got another one from Elizabeth who asked that you'd mentioned other cities you looked at. Which cities, and what did you learn? Are there any financing strategies that they are pursuing that you can't?
We looked at, there weren't any really creative financing strategies. We looked at Cincinnati, Seattle, and Portland, but there weren't any creative financing strategies that we aren't already pursuing. We also have the most steps. I think Cincinnati has about 300 sets of steps. So, you know, I think that it's our problem sort of alone to deal with the massive amount of steps that we have in Pittsburgh. But yeah, we're doing mostly similar things, looking at federal grants and, you know, small projects that we can do in-house. They did have a lot of advice on kind of how people are rebuilding steps. I know something we've really taken to heart is that concrete is really the only way people are getting the 75-year life cycle, and that, you know, Seattle is looking with every set of steps is really critically looking at ways to build them on grade, which is much, you know, the fail point is less less critical, and they're a little bit easier to maintain. And the other advice that we got is just never give up the right of way. You know, plan for future. Even if you can't rebuild a set of steps now, you never know what's going to happen with development in that area in the future, and to keep the right of way secure. Which is something I forgot to mention. I think our staircases are actually city right of way. They're city streets.
Yeah. Have a few more questions rolling in. This one from Jamin. Could you explain the stewardship idea, and does it include snow removal?
We actually had a program years ago before I lived here, just with salt buckets on the top and the bottom of the steps. But yeah, the stewardship program that we're looking at, we've been focused right now in this initial sort of discussion, we've been focused on preparing for a grant application that deals with invasive species removal near right-of-ways. So really, you know, understanding that if the type of planting that's going to be next to a set of steps is so fast growing, we're never going to be able to keep up with the removal of vegetation in the summertime that we would need to provide, you know, a high quality pedestrian route. So we've been sort of brainstorming programs that would be a combination of, you know, local expertise, working with groups that do invasive species removal, also working with groups that do invasive species removal combined with workforce development programs, but also partnering with the community for either being part of those work days or being part of that long-term planting strategy near the steps. So currently, if you want to, you know, get with your neighbors and clear a set of steps, you have to sort of find the random website on DPW's website that has a form, and you can only really pick up trash and maybe paint the railings. So we're looking at maybe even just expanding that a little bit and making that more available to people. And then I think the long term would be, you know, a true stewardship program where community groups are committed and committed to doing more maintenance work on the steps, and maybe have a partner like the invasive species removal and workforce development groups that are already working on these type of issues in steep slopes in the city. And of course, making funding available for that. So that's sort of a long term.
Great. We've got about 5 minutes left, and we have a few more questions. And similar to, you know, crowdsourcing kind of maintenance, how did you think about equity crowdfunding as a financing strategy? Or are you thinking of equity crowdfunding as a financing strategy? Equity
crowdfunding. Can you explain that?
Can I explain equity crowdfunding? I cannot, but this question was delivered by Elizabeth, and I can unmute her. And Elizabeth, are you there?
Yes, and maybe Jen Mayer might add in, but equity investments in, you know, could be institutional investors who would get a return on their investment, and but like in a crowdfunding approach. I don't know, you know, it's an investment model that actually is not a grant. It's more where people would get, you know, the return. So maybe others on the call know more about this, but Jen Mayer might also be able to.
Do you mean? Do you mean staircases that are adjacent to major facilities that rely on them for? So the return is just the fact that people can access their facility?
But I mean, they would actually they would actually invest.
Yeah. I mean, we have looked at adjacent major facilities as potential funders, and I think we will, go down that road once we sort of identify that set of steps that is next to the hospital or the university or the major employer that also needs to be rebuilt. We will be going down the road of asking for funding from adjacent property owners.
Sure, and just to clarify, this is Jen. The equity crowdfunding is one of the options that could raise some capital, that might be an alternative to traditional financing. It lets smaller scale, rather than you having a private equity investor, you just kind of crowdfund, as with Neighborly and some of the, Inmar Backyards. They do it on a grant basis. This would be doing it on, we expect a return on investment, maybe just the same as a return that a bondholder would get. But if there were enough motivated local residents, they might be interested in providing funding at a lower rate because they love the stairs. So it's one of the many options, and I'm sure you guys are exploring all the sort of crowdfunding to tap into.
We have had a little bit of this. The South Side Slope, we've had neighborhood associations who have funded, gotten together and decided to fund, say, a structural assessment of all the steps in their neighborhood. And so we've had a little, small examples of that, but I think we were looking at the sort of stewardship program, and you always have to pick how many times and ways you're asking for resources from people. And we really see a lot of, actual, physical energy and excitement about the steps. And I think we were looking at the sort of citizen role is really that either doing the fundraising or actually doing some of the work and stewardship on the steps. But that's definitely something we can look into more.
Great, and we've got about 1 more minute, so just the last question for you, Kristen, and that is, was there anything you thought was going to be really hard, really challenging, that wound up being really easy? Send us off with some optimism here.
Well, I mean, I've been in Pittsburgh 3 years, and I have sort of always been consistently surprised with how many people show up for transportation meetings in general. And I knew people loved the steps, but I did not expect the kind of interest and involvement that people are willing to take. And I think and that's really optimistic for me, because I know if we started a stewardship program and provided the avenues for people to be, more involved in their steps, either through equity crowdfunding or foundation investment or city investment or, private sort of institutional investment, I know that people will show up to do those things and they will ask for more. There's so much of a cultural identity in the staircases in Pittsburgh that I would say that's the most surprising part of this project for me, is just how much people continually want to give their feedback and work on a project that involves steps at all. People are so interested in this. As am I, so.
Great. Awesome. So people care about their communities, and that includes the people who work for city governments all across the country.
How's that for optimism?
That is optimistic. Thank you very much. Really appreciate your time and preparing this presentation for everyone. We are going to email this out once it's available, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And if you'd like to learn a little bit more about the City Accelerator program, please visit governing.com/City Accelerator. You can read our new guide on infrastructure finance, which was written by Jen Mayer. Listen to podcasts, read blogs from other cohort cities, and just learn a lot more about the types of innovations that can help make your communities better. All right. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.